Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 151. Let me show you what true heartlessness looks like. It wasn't known what the bright red things really were. However, all the red dots were instinctively moving. What is that? A cold sweat ran down Jogul's back. Ki? Or whatever it was, it wasn't going to be good news for them. As they saw the red dots moving, their bodies froze. It felt like their bodies were giving them a warning sign. Sensing the crisis, he looked at Chung Myung. No matter how unusual that man was, he was still the most trustworthy person in such kinds of situations. Chung Myung. Huh? What are they? They look like bats. Bats? Yeah, I think I heard about red-eyed bats somewhere, so... Chung Myung tilted his head. But are bats' eyes normally red? Did that detail even matter now? Chung Myung, who had been thinking quietly for some time, clapped his hands as if he remembered something. Ah, right! Vampire bats! It has to be that! Hong Dae-kwang, who was shocked, now carefully opened his mouth. Then all the red dots are the eyes of those bats. Seems like it. Then what do we do? What do you mean? They're bats. We should just pass by. Chung Myung calmly took a step ahead, and the others all looked around with nervous faces. Will it be fine? Well, if they were just bats, then it shouldn't be a huge deal. Some people avoided them because they were disgusting, but they had never heard of anyone dying from a bat bite. So everyone relaxed and carefully followed Chung Myung. At that moment, Baek-chun leaned close to Chung Myung from the back and said, But Chung Myung, yes? I've heard of the vampire bats, but I've never heard anything about them having red eyes. Is it really true? Maybe not. From what I heard... Ah! Chung Myung clapped his hands again. They might not be simple vampire bats. They have to be the killer vampire bats. There are stories about how its bite can leave a person with all their blood drained, only leaving their body. They're hard to kill too, and are known to be sturdy and hard enough that even the swords with ki cannot cut in. The voice of Chung Myung gradually faded, and he looked back slowly. Everyone was looking at him with trembling bodies and fearful gazes. Seeing that, he asked, You know, right? He took a deep breath and walked one step. It was a movement filled with caution. What will happen if we move? Step. Making noise. Step. Step. Chung Myung smiled brightly. Will this even work? We're finished! Ki! Ki! A sharp cry resounded, and it was so loud that they felt it would tear down their eardrums. The red-eyed bats flew towards them like a unified cloud as soon as that happened. Run! The moment when Chung Myung was about to tell them to run, the people behind him began to run past him. Ah! Ah! If we get caught, even our bones cannot be found. Run! Run! Chung Myung, who saw that, exhaled. These dogs! What? Shouldn't they be like, let's die together and let's live together? Isn't that how the relationship between Sahyungs is supposed to be like? Seeing how his Sahyungs were running ahead of him, tears found their way to his eyes. He couldn't believe that they pushed him away to save themselves. In the meantime, Baek-chun, who was now quite ahead, was running without even looking back at Chung Myung. That one! He's the kind of person who will want to live even if he is the only one who makes it out alive. Just looking at how well he has grown from the past makes me happy. Bastards! You rotten bastards! The red-eyed bats were rushing in at them from all directions. Yeah! Chung Myung also began to run ahead. Why are there bats in this cave? Since this is a cave, of course there are bats here, you stupid bastard! No! How could the ones which are only supposed to be in Yunnan even get in here? How can I even know? Hong Dae-kwang also started to run ahead. Yak's on my ass. He is the one responsible for getting us all killed. He brought the bats all the way from Yunnan and released them here. Sahyong, my Sahyong, if I die in here, beat the shit out of that bastard. How can I, a dead person, hit another dead person? No, then let's call the Sages and do it like we did in the past. What are you doing mumbling to yourself? You madman! Ah! If his Sahyong sect leader was alive, that madman went into the ground and took down the honor of Mount Hua along with him. That too. He would have said that in the calmest voice. And now, as if the bats wanted to punish Chung Myung, they were going after him. Chung Myung swung both his hands to strike down the bats near him. Kung! 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 What is this? When he hit the bat with his hands, it felt like he was pounding on a lump of iron. In Yunnan, it was said that if one went into the cave of the red-eyed bats, or the killer vampire bats, in an instant, you would have been stripped down to your bones. Be careful! Their claws are sharp! Chung Myung could slam the bats down, but the others couldn't. The claws of the bats were eagerly trying to draw their blood by splitting open their uniforms and robes. And as they smelled blood from their wounds, they started flying more fiercely than before. There were hundreds of bats in the air, chasing them. It was a sight that would make anyone lose hope. Branch leader! My arm! My arm isn't moving! What? Damn it! Is it paralysis poison? Hong Dae-kwang's face contorted. How can one bat have so many things in it? A body of steel and sharp claws like a sword. And then there were paralysis poison. It was a monster even the best sect would have trouble handling. The problem was that such monsters weren't attacking a whole sect, but a small number of people. Ugh! Hong Dae-kwang felt a sharp pain in his shoulder, and when he looked, he found a bat attached to his shoulder. You bad fucking bastard! Hong Dae-kwang screamed out loud and struck the bat. A small piece of flesh was pulled out by the bat from his shoulder, and blood gushed out from the wound. This is how everyone will die here. The wounds weren't important. What was more important was the paralysis poison that would enter their body if they got bitten. If that happened, their movements would turn still, and all they could do would be to wait for the bats to devour them while they were alive. Don't get bitten! Kill any bats which come close to you! Branch leader, weapons don't work. They move too strangely. Avoiding them is the only way we can advance. What? There was no time to be annoyed at people. Hong Dae-kwang tried moving the bitten shoulder and stretched out his hand. He executed the first form of the immortal palm of 8, which the Beggars Union was so proud of, but the bat in front of him avoided it easily. It avoided it. A bat avoided the martial arts of the Beggars Union. He felt a chill run down his spine. How can such absurd beings even exist in this world? He knew that the world held countless things which he didn't know of, but it was the Beggars Union who had their eyes everywhere, and technically, it was their job to know about everything out there. And this feeling of not knowing something felt terrifying. Even if Hong Dae-kwang did his best, would he be able to handle at least 10 of these creatures? He didn't have confidence. Moreover, this place didn't have just 10, but hundreds of these bats, and everyone would surely die. Mount Hua's Divine Dragon! Mount Hua's Divine Dragon! Please do something! In a crisis like this, the only person he could look for was Chung Myung. Oh! Chung Myung drew out his sword with an annoyed face. Mount Hua's! Hong Dae-kwang turned back to urge him again, but went silent. Nothing changed. Chung Myung had simply drawn his sword. The expression, the force, nothing changed after that. But it's different. It wasn't known what the difference was, but it felt as if Chung Myung, who was running behind them, was different. And that made Hong Dae-kwang feel even more shocked. The young one of Mount Hua, who brazenly opened his mouth and said whatever he wanted, suddenly disappeared, and there was a swordsman there in his place, a swordsman who had been through hundreds of battles, and his sword moved slowly. It felt like there was a wind blowing in from somewhere. Chung Myung's sword moved gently. It felt like the tip of the sword was shaking, and dozens, maybe hundreds, of sword forms began to engulf the dark cave. Plums, plums, plum blossoms are blooming. A plum blossom began to bloom at the tip of the sword forms which had appeared suddenly. It transitioned from small buds into flowers and then into full-bloomed ones. It was as if the entire cave had plum blossom trees within it. Even though Hong Dae-gwang knew that it wasn't the case, he still couldn't get himself together. This is the martial arts of Mount Hua? Mount Hua's plum blossom. The plum blossoms of Mount Hua, which had once disappeared from the world's memory, were now blooming again, right in front of Hong Dae-gwang's eyes. The scent of plum blossoms began to fill the cave. Hong Dae-gwang felt his body shudder at the scent. Despite knowing that this was happening just because of the sword, it felt like he was drifting away into some fantasy. And there were falling flowers. The plum blossoms began to flutter, and the petals of the plum blossoms followed the draft of wind and engulfed the cave like a blizzard, clearing away the bats. Keek! Keek, 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 keek! The screams of the bats resounded everywhere. The sound of the wings fluttering in desperation was heard by Hong Dae-gwang. The sound he heard a while back and what he was hearing now was different. This time, it was the sound of the bats being cut down by the sword of Chung Myung. Ah! Hong Dae-gwang realized that the plum blossoms which filled the cave had disappeared as if they had been swept away, and he sighed in regret. Shh! The sword was back in the sheath. Phew! Chung Myung let out a short sigh and lifted his head. Hong Dae-gwang had seen a man wielding his sword with force like a refined blade of, bloody bad bastards don't even know who they're up against. Forget it. Chung Myung was back to his usual behavior and widened his shoulders in triumph. If only he didn't open his mouth, Hong Dae-gwang would have felt impressed. What? You don't want to pass through? Going. Hong Dae-gwang glanced back. Swish. Not all the bats were cut down. More than half of them were still alive, but they were sticking to the wall of the cave and glaring at them. But they were animals, and they realized that the power of Chung Myung was higher, so they didn't approach them and just kept threatening them with sounds. A sword which instills fear in a flock of bats. No, can a group of bats be called a flock? Hong Dae-gwang felt that the entire situation was bizarre, or should he call this great? Hong Dae-gwang shook his head and looked at the end of the cave that they were fast approaching. Damn it, I'm so scared thinking about what new things might come. Hong Dae-gwang bit his lip as he was walking. Still, it was the right choice to stick with this brat. If it wasn't for that, he would have died right from the start. Hong Dae-gwang looked at Chung Myung with eyes filled with trust. Chung Myung, who knew what was happening, had a nice smile. Did you come here to play? Why do you keep looking at me? The Beggars Union is done after this. So done. No, maybe not so trustworthy after all. Chapter 152. Let me show you what true heartlessness looks like. The end of the cave led to another cave. If there was anything different about the two, it would be that, unlike the hallways they had gone through until then, this cave had night stone lamps. Doesn't this seem like it's repeated, Sa-hyung? It seems like that. I'm not sure yet, but I think that the space where the lamps are placed is safe as long as we don't do anything stupid. as long as we don't do anything useless. Seeing Baekchun, who was saying that while looking at Hong Dae-kwang, the man sighed. Sometimes people end up making mistakes. I didn't point to anyone, great sir. Right, great sir. He was still being called that. He wanted to tear up as he heard it. As a result of observing the disciples of Mount Hua till then, Hong Dae-kwang noticed something strange. The first was that unlike Chung Myung, who acted as if he had abandoned his brain, the others still kept their manners and respected others. Of course, at first glance, their words and actions resembled Chung Myung to some extent, but it wasn't too much that it could be visibly noticed. And they are very strong. As they came out of the cave where the bats were located, the Beggars Union people had major and minor injuries. They were poisoned and paralyzed, which made it difficult for them to move. It wasn't a life-threatening situation, but their pace had slowed down. But the disciples of Mount Hua didn't get hurt even in that hectic situation. Was it because of luck? No way. People got lucky once or twice, but if it kept continuing, it was skill and not luck. Righteous Sword of Hua. Call me Baekchun. That title is embarrassing. Ah, yes, Baekchun. Yes. Are the Sayongs and Sajas of Mount Hua similar to the ones here? With a slightly worried expression, Baekchun said, They aren't. Yunjong and Jogul are the strongest ones among the third-class disciples, and Yu Same and I are the skilled ones among the second-class disciples of Mount Hua. But that doesn't mean that the Sayongs back in Mount Hua are significantly inferior to us. Saying that, Baekchun looked at Chung Myung. The skills which they developed were completely because they had been bullied by that beast. There was no time for people to rest and lag behind their peers. I see. Hong Dae-kwang's face turned slightly serious. He was a branch leader in Loyang, and Loyang was considered to be the largest city in the Middle East. As such, the Beggars Union had talented people. Of course, due to the nature of their sect, they searched for quantity over quality. The beggars who followed him weren't at a level where they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other sects. However, they still weren't a sect whose members would get indiscriminately hit. But weren't the disciples of Mount Hua showing much better skills than the beggars in Loyang? If the members of Mount Hua really were this skilled, what should Mount Hua's power be evaluated as? Besides, that monster is also there. The sword he saw a while back wasn't disappearing from his eyes. No, he knew for sure that he would remember it till the day of his last life. He had never witnessed such a fantastic sword technique in his life. What if Chung Myung grows up and leads Mount Hua and his disciples grow together with him and support him? Then Mount Hua will not be inferior to any other great sect. In the past, Mount Hua was one of the best sects in the world. If they hadn't been damaged after the fight with the Heavenly Demon Sect, then the situation of the sect wouldn't have been what it was now. However, now, it didn't seem difficult for Mount Hua to regain the prestige it had in the past, especially if Chung Myung continued to run rampant with such a force. Branch leader, Hong Dae-kwang, who was immersed in thought, frowned slightly as he looked at the Beggars Union disciples who were struggling to move. Mount Hua's divine dragon, I know we are in a hurry, but can we take a break? I want my disciples to recover a bit. Yeah, sure. Surprisingly, Chung Myung nodded his head right away, and Hong Dae-kwang flinched at it. What? No, because you answered right away. You said they're hurt. Thanks. Hong Dae-kwang looked at Chung Myung. Is it because I am a branch leader? Although not all people will respect Hong Dae-kwang, maybe, just maybe, he thought that Chung Myung finally realized that he was the eldest in the group. However, the words of Chung Myung, who suddenly considered the well-beings of the people before his goal, felt weird. The more I see him, the more I don't understand him. Hong Dae-kwang tilted his head and approached the disciples. In the midst of all that, Chung Myung was frowning as he fixed his gaze ahead of him. His eyes concentrated on the distance. I feel something from there. Vitality and chaos were pouring out from the location in front of them. It meant that either a fight had occurred over there, or that someone who fell into a trap was fighting for their life. There is no need to rush there and fight them. If he waited patiently, the path would clear by itself. So why did he have to go in now and enter a fight which he had nothing to do with? It was good that they entered the sword tomb, but safely going out should also be clearly planned. Many traps could have been hidden in the darkness of the tunnels of the sword tomb. If monsters like the bats kept coming out continuously, no matter how strong and untouched they were at the present, they would eventually get tired. Chung Myung had learned all of this from the experiences he had gained from the long battles he had had in the past. Battles where he would have to conserve his energy until the end. And when everyone decided to take a break, the party leaned against the wall and sat down. Still, they were all on edge and were constantly alert to their surroundings. Ugh, my. Yoonjung, who sat on the ground, sighed. Man, even if we had 10 lives, we'd run out of them in a place like this. It is indeed tough. As Chung Myung smiled, Yoonjung raised his head and looked at him. He seemed so familiar with such things. No matter how big the wall between them was, anyone would be confused when they were thrust into an unfamiliar situation for the first time. Moving forward one step at a time in a place where light didn't even shine, where traps were placed everywhere. Just thoughts of it would make people tired. And moreover, they were required to be focused all the time. Yet Chung Myung seemed strong. Is it not tough? What's so tough about it? This is just the start. The start. Yaksun, or the seizing sword, whoever it was that made a tomb like this, if he was so determined and laid such traps, then it wouldn't end with just this. We never know what awaits us. Yoonjung frowned. It wasn't that he was upset, but he heard the word determined. Then, the untraceable seizing sword, Yaksun, why did he create such a place? Huh? If what was being left behind was the Great Pill, or if he wanted to leave the weapon he stole, he could just leave them without laying any traps. Why create such a tomb and endanger those who entered the place? How can I know? Chung Myung smiled bitterly. Yoonjung continued. At first, this is how I thought about it. But the more I think, the stranger it is. Especially when I think of Yaksun. He was a sage who cured many sick people and created pills for healing. That was why he was called Yaksun in the first place. Right. But such a man, and even the other person, the seizing sword too, why create such a grave? I don't understand at all. We don't need to understand it. Huh? Chung Myung smirked and said, There's only one thing that I'm sure about. What is that? People are never predictable. Chung Myung shrugged his shoulders. Even those whom we think we know very well show an unexpected side to them once in a while. How can we understand a person who lived 200 years ago? We just need to take the things they left behind and leave. They were realistic words, but it was rather cold-hearted. Although Chung Myung said that, Yoonjung couldn't shake off his doubts about this place being called Yaksun's tomb. Why would Yaksun make this tomb? What was he trying to say? At that moment, Chung Myung glanced at him and said, It's not like that. Huh? Don't start there. We need to figure out why the names of Yaksun and the untraceable seizing sword are both being used here. Ah, Yoonjung was slightly shocked. He hadn't thought of that till now. Yaksun was someone who used to help everyone. The untraceable seizing sword was a man who had enough fame and glory without having to be considered a swordsman of a true sect. Did Yaksun wear the mask of the swordsman and hold a sword? Yoonjung looked at Chung Myung quietly. Chung Myung. It felt like he was trying to make a link. This man was the youngest in here, but he sometimes showed a depth that couldn't be kept up with. What? No, it felt like you were figuring something out. Chung Myung smirked. What is so important about that? Huh? If Yaksun had some other intentions, would he leave behind his pill and knowledge? He wouldn't. Then that is all. I'm not interested in dead people's reasons. The important thing is that there is a way for us to get the method of making the soul vitality pill in here. Even if I die, I will get it, for sure. Yunjong sighed as he looked at Chung Myung's eyes, burning with desire. Being simple-minded is the best. Sometimes he envied that personality, because such people worried about nothing. He didn't know if that was just an outward appearance. However, at that time, Yu Yi-sol came and handed Chung Myung a water bottle. Without a second thought, Chung Myung took it. Chung Myung took it and drank it. Then he asked Hong Dae-gwang, "Mr. Beggar, are you guys done?" "The detox medicine is working." "You have medicine for the paralysis poison." "It is an antidote for paralysis poison. We never know what kind of person we come across. We tried it just in case, and it seemed to work." "Oh." Chung Myung's eyes shone as he looked at him. What do you think of me, Hong Dae-gwang? I am the body and mind of the Beggars Union." Yeah. Hong Dae-gwang felt flustered when the reaction wasn't as cool as he expected. "Finish up. We'll keep moving as soon as you're ready." "But where the hell does this sword tomb go? It didn't seem like we moved a short distance before." Chung Myung shrugged. "The cave is curved, so the actual distance must be short." "Is that so?" "Even so, there must be a limit to creating such a thing underground. The end of the tomb will appear any time now." Right. Let's go and find out." The party got up again and began to prepare to head further in. Chung Myung, who watched the scene, had a subtle expression on his face. It wasn't a lie that they were nearing the end of the tomb. The problem was that there would be people who have reached the end along with them. Enemy of evil. Recalling the title of Yaksun, Chung Myung smiled. "Let's see what more has been prepared for us." Chung Myung had an evil smile. Chapter 153. Let me show you what true heartlessness looks like. Chung Myung licked his lips and looked behind him. Let's go." I need to take all of them." "Why are you being so greedy, you bastard? You're a rich bastard. No matter how much money we have, we can never have enough. Do you know how much it costs to feed Mount Hua? It costs hundreds of thousands of coins just to dress and feed them. 100,000! I'd rather have cattle and beggars under me." Chung Myung looked at the night stone lamps with greedy eyes. They're worth so much." And then he looked at Hong Dae-gwang. Hong Dae-gwang was avoiding the gaze of Chung Myung, who kept glaring at him. If the ceiling hadn't collapsed because of his actions, he would have surely picked out all of them to earn more gold. But now that he had been through that, he wouldn't dare to touch it again. Tears of blood flowed from Chung Myung's eyes, who had to walk away from the night stone lamps without touching them. To him, it was like losing gold that was right in front of his eyes. "Beggar! I will never forget this grudge." "Wait, what did I even do?" "I did nothing." "Move, let's move out quickly." Before he did anything else, Baekchun and Yoonjung quickly dragged Chung Myung out of the place, and the rest sighed as they followed. Wow! And everyone looked around in shock as they reached the next place. Such a place was made underground? The place which opened up in front of them was a huge square-shaped space. As soon as they entered the place, rumble. Huh? Hong Dae-gwang shook his head. Immediately, after they passed, large stone walls descended from above. Thud. The walls caused dust to rise in the room. Hong Dae-gwang frowned as he realized that the path they came from was blocked. This isn't good. Well, even if they tried to go back the same way they had come, they wouldn't be able to exit the sword tomb since the hallway had collapsed. Still, it was a pity that a path was cut off. But now, what Hong Dae-gwang was more concerned about was what he saw ahead rather than the blocked path behind him. because in the middle of the square, there seemed to be a group of people. Who are they? They wore different colors, and they didn't seem like a group. Hong Dae-gwang thought that they were all people who met up here by chance and were sharing information. But that wasn't the problem. The real problem was, there's something here. I think we're almost done now. It'll be better if we just deal with them and move on. They might be planning to get the weapons as well, and not just the pill. Right. Hong Dae-gwang's face hardened. The smell of blood. The smell of blood was coming from one side of the room. Only then did Hong Dae-gwang turn to see the bodies which were lying at the side of the room. Hong Dae-gwang then narrowed his eyes to look at the opponent and said, "Makhui, the giant great axe." Looks like it's someone who knows me. Tell me who you are. Hong Dae-gwang frowned at the opponent's huge size and looked at the axe, which was larger than the human himself. The Samsalgui, Dera Sword, and Yangtze Black Blade, Chung Myung-san. Are you also in on this craziness? The other man in black gently raised his head. It was Cho Myung-san. Now that I look more closely, you are Hong, right? Yes, it's me. I thought that at least you were a man who had manners. How could you slaughter innocent people without guilt? What horrible things have you done? Without guilt. Cho Myung-san smiled brightly. Hong, you're making a mistake here. Don't forget what kind of world we live in. Trying to obtain this treasure for oneself is a sin, and aiming for it is also a sin. You, Hong Dae-gwang's face turned red. I hope that you would have at least known about chivalry. Of course, Cho Myung-san said while looking at Hong Dae-gwang. If I manage to get the weapons, I will be stronger. Then I will show people the chivalry which suits my strength. I'm talking about the dead people who you're trampling on. I cannot help it, because these aren't the people whom I have to protect or look after. Crazy bastard. Cho Myung-san shrugged his shoulders. I thought you would understand me, since we came from the same roots. There is no way I can understand a crazy man. If I could understand you, that would mean that I'm the same as you. The disciples of Mount Hua were now looking at Hong Dae-gwang in a new light. Up until now, they considered him a half-smart person, but his current actions shed new light on the beggars' union in their eyes. Hong Dae-gwang gritted his teeth and said, You have been blinded by the treasure, but no matter how greedy you are, there are things you can and cannot do. This beggar speaks quite well. The giant man in the back mumbled. Then do you want to talk? From the moment everyone jumped into this place, they have thoughts of killing their opponents to get their hands on the treasure. You don't need to kill someone to subdue them. I mean, look at how you killed everyone. There's a degree to how far horrible deeds can be done. Then, isn't it? Dera Sword raised his voice and said, Isn't it different for each person, beggar? Dera Sword. There is no need to talk further. You will die here. What is the reason you are doing something like this? You're asking such an obvious question. There is no need to drag things out and drain my energy later. You people know it as well, right? This place is full of traps. Those who take the lead and go ahead will obviously take more damage than the others. We also need to leave behind people to slow down others to keep them off our backs. One wary glare and people will kill you. So I chose a slightly different yet more efficient method. Hong Dae-gwang grunted his teeth. The Wudang sect's people must be ahead, and they were chasing after the Wudang sect. Their plan was to wait for Wudang to exhaust themselves and then take them down and snatch a treasure. So far, it was a good strategy with no holes in it. But Hong Dae-gwang slowly turned his head. In the square, he saw doors he hadn't noticed before. It seems like they didn't notice them because they were all blocked by the stone, just like the path they had taken to come here. Now, there was exactly one exit from this place. Do you get it now? What do you mean? We are just following the path of the untraceable seizing sword. The roads which have split have again become a single path, and there is a huge square here, and there is only one way forward. In other words, Dera Sword smiled. It seems we will kill each other here or die trying. Hong Dae-kwang's body trembled at those words. What the hell was Yaksun thinking while making this place? With such a structure, people who were blinded by the treasure would definitely meet, and those who managed to break through the traps and reach this place would be the strong ones, and they would be on edge after realizing that there were others following them. If such strong people with anxiousness rising inside them suddenly faced each other, a fight was bound to happen. So is there any problem with dying or killing? It was just that now, it was us that ended up in the position to kill. Dera Sword drew his sword and raised it. The sword still had blood on it that hadn't been wiped off. Hong Dae-kwang's eyes trembled when he saw the blood. For such a trivial reason. Don't act so naive, beggar. Don't you know it as well? Until now, whenever the name Sword Tomb appeared in the world, there wasn't a single time when blood wasn't spilt. Even for the fake sword tombs, there was blood that was spilt. Did you really believe that people would just get along? Hong Dae-kwang didn't answer. Actually, what he said wasn't wrong, because Hong Dae-kwang also came here prepared to see blood. Until now, he didn't have to deal with such means since the disciples of Mount Hua subdued the people who appeared in front of them, and because their path was different from others. Regardless, even Hong Dae-kwang wouldn't simply shy away from spilling blood. But it isn't done like this. Killing people who are visibly weak. There was no reason to kill people when they could just be subdued, but to catch and kill every single one of them, to slaughter them just because they might create trouble. Hong Dae-kwang couldn't ignore this. So you will kill me too? Is there any other way? Then there is no need for words. Hong Dae-kwang clenched his fists. The Beggars' Union disciples quickly lined up behind him. The Beggars' Union. It will be burdensome to deal with you. But here, with no people to spread what happened, you are just normal beggars. Dera Sword shrugged. Hong Dae-kwang also knew that it was their weakness here. The opponents were strong people who couldn't be ignored. Since such people had banded together in a group now, he couldn't do anything to them with his own disciples. So, Disciple Baekchun, please help us. Of course we will. Baekchun drew his sword and stood next to him. Behind him, Yoonjong, Jogul, and Yu Yi-sol stood with their swords drawn. I am not someone who prides himself on following rules, but I don't like seeing people cross the line. The disciples of Mount Hua nodded their heads. There were at least 20 corpses here. In other words, there were more than 20 people who were needlessly dragged and killed here. Looking into the eyes of Mount Hua's disciples, Dera Sword smiled. The disciples of Mount Hua. Recently, the name of Mount Hua has been going around a lot. Unfortunately, you will find out that you aren't that strong in Gangho. Shut up! At Baekchun's yell, Dera Sword burst into laughter. This is why it is fun to see the ones who step into Gangho for the first time. There's no need to waste more time. Let's quickly deal with them and chase after Wudang. I get to taste blood again. One by one, people drew their weapons to take down the disciples of Beggars' Union and Mount Hua. Hong Dae-kwang's expression darkened. Will all those bastards work together? Among those who had come to Nanyang, the people who were revered as masters were all gathered here. It wouldn't be easy to take them down, even if the Wudang sect was facing them. And now, they were expected to do it. It was dangerous. Even when he looked at this with a calm heart, he realized that it was impossible for the Beggars' Union and Mount Hua to deal with them. No, there was a higher chance of them being pushed into a corner. Hong, don't blame me for this. This is how the world usually works. Hong Dae-kwang bit his lip. I need to create an opening so that we can escape through the exit which is behind them. It was the moment he was thinking. Have you said everything that has to be said? A strange voice pierced his ears. It was a low voice with no emotion. Hong Dae-kwang turned his head to see from whom the voice had come. Chung Myung. He had an expressionless face as he walked past Hong Dae-kwang. A subtle light shone in the eyes of Dae-ra Sword, who saw him walking towards them. Oh, and who are you? You don't need to know. What was that? Chung Myung stared at Dae-ra Sword and spoke in a cold voice. Gang-ho usually works like this, was it? I will show you what true heartlessness looks like. And Chung Myung pulled out his sword from its sheath. Chapter 154. Let me show you what true heartlessness looks like. Cho Myung-san's hand trembled slightly. What's with him? His gaze fixed on the young disciple who had stepped forward. There was nothing special about him, nor could any tremendous ki be felt from him. Even so, Cho Myung-san couldn't take his eyes off this young disciple from the moment he stepped forward. Seriously, is this feeling for real right now? A chill was running down his spine. He had earned the name Yangtze Black Blade through countless fierce battles. In other words, Cho Myung-san was not some greenhorn that developed his skills in comfort, but someone that had grown through constant struggle. So he could tell just by looking at the opponent. Was this just a kid with talent, or was he an experienced warrior? If it was just some kid with talent, then there was nothing to be afraid of. Cho Myung-san had defeated many opponents stronger or more talented than himself. A sword prepared to kill isn't afraid of talent. But what is up with this guy? His senses kept warning him, telling him that it was dangerous. The child standing before him was a serious threat. His muscles contracted tightly as his hand gripped his sword. He gulped desperately, trying to quench his dry throat. Cho Myung-san couldn't understand what he was feeling right now. This person was clearly still a child, fresh from his mother's milk. Although he was a disciple of Mount Hua, he shouldn't know the world's cruelties. It was only recently that Mount Hua restarted their outside activities and began to let its disciples venture into Gang-ho. Yet, Cho Myung-san's senses were screaming at him that this disciple in front of him was an old monster who had fought countless battles. This child was the most dangerous enemy. If they met on the battlefield, then the only course of action would be to run away without looking back. How could that even be possible? Thick drops of sweat began to flow down Cho Myung-san's forehead. It made no sense, but he already knew that Gang-ho was a place where things that exceeded common sense occur incessantly. If the bones of those that died, clinging on to an idyllic notion of common sense, were collected, they could fill any lake one could imagine. To survive in the martial world, it was better to trust one's own senses rather than a common sense that constantly gets forced to adapt. Don't belittle that child. It was a simple statement that Cho Myung-san had struggled to bring up only after much deliberation, but not a single person there could understand. Dae-ra Sword smiled and looked at him. What are you talking about? Are you joking right now? It seems like there's something even Yangtze Black Blade is afraid of. What are we going to do if you get cold feet after seeing one disciple? Ma Kui openly laughed. Cho Myung-san didn't get angry despite their words and jokes. He didn't think they would understand what he felt. Even he wasn't fully convinced, despite his senses trying to convey such an absurd warning. So how could they understand? If you are scared, just stay back. I'll take care of him. Dae-ra Sword laughed and stepped forward with a sneer. But Cho Myung-san had no thoughts of dissuading him. He had already given one warning. There was no need to dissuade someone that was arrogantly walking into danger. They were simply working together for a while. They had no intentions of being friends. Dae-ra Sword stepped ahead and looked down at Chung Myung. You said that you're going to show me what true heartlessness looks like. Chung Myung didn't respond. Seeing that, the man laughed. Such a young kid doesn't seem to understand fear. Or has that sense of justice of yours set your heart on fire? Chung Myung looked at Daeda's sword without another word. I'll tell you one thing, boy. In Gangho, that sense of justice is useless. Chivalry and honor belong to those with power. Diplomacy is the same. Trying to negotiate without power is just nonsense. You're about to learn that today. Of course, the price is going to be your life. Chung Myung looked at him and said, Are you done? What? I asked if you're finished yet, or are you going to continue prattling on? Daeda's sword's eyes became fierce. This little brat has a nasty mouth. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. He slowly began to walk toward Daeda's sword, as if any further conversation was meaningless. The Plum Blossom Sword swayed as Chung Myung held it naturally in his hand and continued his silent approach. A strange sense of pressure began to weigh on Daeda's sword. You! Daeda's sword was enraged and about to yell when Chung Myung expressionlessly cut him off. Well, weren't you going to kill me anyway? Daeda's sword was silent. Then all there is to do is kill. That was correct. No matter how Chung Myung had reacted, Daeda's sword planned to kill him. They were here instead of the other door because they intended to kill every bit of competition that entered. So like Chung Myung said, their aim was to kill him. Whether the opponent was arrogant, ignorant, or scared, they wouldn't care about such things. The ones that came before him didn't act like this. The cold corpses scattered across the ground had all cursed and pleaded as they died. But did Daeda's sword spare their lives? He scoffed at their reactions, looked down on them, and laughed as he severed their lives. But why was he so bothered about Chung Myung's reactions, and why did he try to talk to him? Daeda's sword bit his lip. He felt like he must look like a frightened puppy right now. Wolves don't howl before hunting. They simply rush in, bite, and kill their prey. Only frightened dogs raise their voices and bark to avoid fighting. What nonsense. Why was Daeda's sword scared? Because of that Mount Hua and Beggars Union? What a joke. The people he had killed in this room could tear open the heads of any Beggars Union or Mount Hua disciple with their bare hands. So why was he afraid of such a disciple now? Clench. He gripped the large sword in his hand more tightly. The muscles in his body were all clenched and taut. Right. Let's see if he can still talk like that with a sword down his throat. Daeda's sword raised his sword against Chung Myung. But until that moment, he hadn't realized that something was wrong. Daeda's sword anger was bizarre in itself. It should be something to laugh at when a hopeless kid fearlessly risks his life. It wasn't something to get angry about. If only Daeda's sword hadn't been so drunk on his emotions, he might have noticed it. But it wasn't until the very end that he realized it as he hastened forward. Step, step, step. Daeda's sword was shocked as he glared at Chung Myung, who looked indifferent. His huge sword, which was several inches longer than a standard blade, aimed for Chung Myung's head as it cut through the air. Kang! But Chung Myung's head wasn't split in half. Before the sword could even reach his target, Chung Myung lightly deflected that large sword. He stopped it. A kid's block had blocked his attack. Anger and bewilderment simultaneously pierced Daeda's sword's heart. However, he was a man of Gangho with a strong sense of pride. His panic only lasted a moment before he recovered his sword and aimed another strike at Chung Myung's side. Swish! A deep blue key resonated on the blade as it sliced at Chung Myung. Kang! But this time as well, the same sight repeated. The sword failed to reach Chung Myung's body and was bounced back again. Had it really been blocked again? No, that's not what's important. The important thing wasn't that Daeda's sword attack had been blocked, but the fact that he had never seen Chung Myung's sword move to block his attacks. It was as if the sword broke through space to suddenly appear there. Instead of moving to block, it seemed to manifest in the right place. Impossible. It seemed like nonsense. I am Dera Sword. Even if the opponent was a first-class disciple from a great sect, they would still be nervous against him. But this child, Chung Myung, was stronger than him. That cannot happen. Ah! Dera Sword let loose a furious bellow, but Chung Myung remained unfazed as his gaze stayed firm. Dera Sword swung wildly once again. The sword was filled with his determination to kill the opponent. It was a series of deadly strikes that did not allow any hope for his opponent to survive. Kang, kang, kang. Not a single move was executed randomly. Every attack was aimed to kill. Yet Chung Myung had blocked them all. Despite unleashing 10 swift strikes instantly, every one of them bounced back without reaching Chung Myung's body. Despair began to creep into Dera Sword's eyes. You! The young swordsman had a blue shine on his sword. Realizing that precision and speed wouldn't be enough to win, Dera Sword changed techniques and began to try and overwhelm his opponent with his ki. No matter how strong Chung Myung was, he was still young. Therefore, Dera Sword was certain of victory once he dragged him into a battle of ki. After all, it was common sense. No matter how gifted a child is, they can't overcome the gap in time. However, there was one problem. Common sense didn't apply to Chung Myung. Ta! A sword carrying the dungeon's internal key rushed for Chung Myung. The sword appeared to double in size compared to before as it swelled in strength. A menacing force as if it would split the opponent's skull in two. However, Dera Sword quickly realized that he had made the wrong choice. Pang! The moment his massive sword struck, Chung Myung's sword moved twice as fast as it had before. And Dera Sword saw it then. The way his sword soared into the sky. A sword coated in deep blue ki bounced high in the sky. The moment he saw his hand, still clasping the sword as it flew away, the word despair engraved itself deeply into his mind. The last thing he saw as he lowered his head was the emotionless eyes of Chung Myung coldly staring at him. No anger, no animosity. How could anyone look at another person with such eyes? How could a child have such eyes? Steadily, Chung Myung passed by Dera Sword at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. Just as a question was about to rise in Dera Sword's head. Huh? The word slowly began to tilt. Everything he saw flipped upside down and rotated as if the sky and earth were overturned. What is this? The earth was rising and the sky was falling. His question remained unresolved as a familiar yet unfamiliar sight entered Dera Sword's vision. A human body. The man's body standing there was far too familiar to Dera Sword, but it looked unfamiliar too. He had never seen his own body from this angle before. Moreover, when would he ever see his own body without the head? No. That was the last thought the man had in this world. Thud. Dera Sword's body, which had lost its head, fell to the ground. A fountain of blood poured from the neatly severed neck and soaked Chung Myung's feet. However, Chung Myung softly spoke without even looking at the fresh corpse he had created. Next. Chapter 155. Let me show you what true heartlessness looks like. Silence swept through the area. Maki couldn't open his mouth. He couldn't believe that Dera Sword could be defeated this easily. Even he couldn't guarantee such an easy victory. Rather, he would have to put his life on the line if he had been the one to battle Dera's sword. But the child standing before them had killed him as easily as snuffing out a bug. Instantly, all sense of reality seemed to collapse and fade away. Losing one's grip on reality on a battlefield was an unacceptable error. However, what just happened was almost too absurd to believe. Ma Kui was about to speak, but quickly fell silent. Any words he wanted to speak felt meaningless at this time. Dera's sword's severed head had fallen to the ground with eyes that would eternally reflect his disbelief. That expression accurately echoed the sentiments of those present. It represented everyone's current emotions. Clench. Chung Myung-san's grip tightened around his blade. As expected. He couldn't have imagined this, but his senses were right. This young man was no beginner or newbie. Rather, he was a killing spirit. This wasn't an issue of the young man being strong or not. It was clear that this young man had been through countless battles, and in the process, he must have created a river of blood beneath a mountain of corpses. There wasn't even a flicker of unrest in his actions. As if he was thoroughly accustomed to it, there were no ferocious or wild emotions that escaped his stoic visage. Seeing this only confirmed Chung Myung-san's thoughts. He made beheading a person look as natural as plucking leaves from a tree. Clearly, that bastard is so used to killing. Chung Myung-san gulped. Maybe, just maybe, this will be my grave. Upon realizing that his back was drenched in a cold sweat, he firmly came to a decision. Let's work together. What did you say? I said we should work together. Everyone's eyes were stolen from Chung Myung as they darted to Chung Myung-san. Their gazes were a mix of shock, dismay, and anger. Did you just say we should work against that kid? It would be better if you shut up. Age doesn't mean anything in Gangho. What matters is strength, and that man there is definitely strong. Also, Chung Myung-san closed his mouth. It was meaningless. No matter how hard he tried to explain, there was no way to make the others understand Chung Myung's casual familiarity with murder. This was no longer a matter of logic, but rather an issue of sense and instinct. How could I explain to them that my senses are screaming about how dangerous he is? If we don't work together, we'll all die. It sounded absurd, but everyone present knew that those nonsensical words were the truth. They all saw the head rolling on the ground. If they failed to grasp the opponent's strength, even after seeing that battle with their own eyes, they would never have been able to survive until now. He doesn't even seem to be out of breath. The young man had taken no damage at all from the beginning until Dera's sword's head was separated from his neck. Therefore, the difference between their skills was too great to judge. If Chung Myung had decided to use his full strength without conserving anything, perhaps he could have finished him off before he even had a chance to retaliate. At least those still alive were all able to grasp the situation. How can such a demon exist? Sun Myung let out a moan. He lacked the ability to accurately gauge the young man's power, but it obviously extended far beyond his own reach. Sun Myung bit his lip. Let's work together. Everyone stayed silent at those words. Throw your pride away. This is something we need to do to protect our lives. Who would know we joined forces here anyway, right? If the outside world came to know that these men had cooperated in fighting a single disciple from Mount Hua, a young one at that, they would become laughingstocks. For strong men living in Gangho, ridicule was intolerable. However, this was an underground room with no eyes around to see what would happen. As long as the ones cooperating kept silent, how would anyone know how Chung Myung died? Their concern was short-lived as they quickly made their judgment. Those who actively sympathized stepped forward without a word, and those who were passive couldn't back down either. Regardless of whether they ganged up or not, Chung Myung needed to be killed here in order for them to survive. Chung Myung's eyes sank and his momentum shifted as he looked at those around him. Was he angry? No way. It seemed like Chung Myung was angry when he looked at the corpses, but he wasn't. Rather, he could agree with them. They had entered the sword tomb, armed with their own weapons, which meant that they came prepared to risk their lives. It was meaningless to separate right from wrong when people were actively throwing themselves into life or death situations. Hong Dae-kwang didn't seem to agree with that, but for Chung Myung, this felt natural. This was nothing for him, who had experienced hellish wars in the past. He had seen countless sights more terrible than this. The anger that threatened to penetrate through one's flesh and the heart that passionately burned with righteousness was meaningless on the battlefield. The reason he killed Daera's sword was simple, because that man tried to kill him first. After being reborn in this new body, Chung Myung hadn't once set foot on a battlefield. Fighting with children, stealing money, or bullying others could not be considered battles. Only when one is filled with the malicious desire to kill their opponent, even as their limbs are torn from their body, could it truly be called a battlefield. And those that stand on the battlefield should understand that matters rarely go as planned. That was all. That was what Chung Myung realized in the wars of the past. Drip. Drop. Blood dripped to the ground from Chung Myung's Plum Blossom Sword. Chung Myung coldly observed as the group approached with weapons drawn. 9 in total. He needed to kill all 9 while preserving as much stamina as possible. Kid. Damn it, I can't even call you kid. Ma Kui, who took the lead with a contorted face, held out an axe with blue key on it. You should feel honored. If you weren't this strong, we never would have joined forces like this. Chung Myung looked at him and spoke. If you're done talking, come. Ma Kui gnashed his teeth. It was shameful, but he knew. Even if he had to live in shame, it was 100 or even 1,000 times better than dying while holding on to his pride. Moreover, this was a place where dying left one in an unrecognizable open grave. In this place, pride wasn't worth a single cent. I'll admit that you have guts. Even if you die here, Mount Hua's name will spread throughout the world. As this happened, Chung Myung was calmly analyzing his opponent's strength. Cooperation. He wasn't going to blame them for that. So many people in Gangho hold on to those antiquated ideals and feel that it's shameful to unite to survive. But if the opponent is too strong, are people expected to just rush headfirst into death? This was no game. There were no second chances after death. Whether it be poison, cooperation, traps, or even needing to clench their opponent's crotch, anything was acceptable if it meant survival. But some would disagree. Not just 1 or 2, but 9 people ganging up on a child so much younger than themselves. More than strength, I suppose a thick face is what's needed to survive. Step. Step. A man slowly walked forward and stood next to Chung Myung. Chung Myung glanced to his side to see who it was. Baek-chun. He stood there with a faint smile. Perhaps he had come forward to assist. Chung Myung's response to such a kind Sasuk was, "What? You're in my way. Move." "I was helping." Baek-chun sighed. Then, ignoring Chung Myung's words, he drew his sword and aimed it forward. "Even if I'm in your way, deal with it." "Huh?" "I am your Sasuk and your brother in the sect. How can I stand aside while my Sajil is risking his life in battle?" "No, I would prefer that over you disturbing me." "You're right, Sasuk." Perhaps impressed by his valiant words, Yoonjung quickly approached and stood next to Baek-chun. "Sajae is fighting with his life on the line. As his Sahyung, I cannot just watch from the sidelines." I agree with that." Jogul, let's fight together. Yu Yi-sol. Chung Myung sighed as he looked at the disciples of Mount Hua, who filled in the gaps to his left and right. Well, they are young kids. Seeing them rush into this fight without even knowing what kind of situation this was felt annoying. Then you had better be prepared to sever an arm or cut their head off. Do you think it's going to be easy? We know this is no easy feat, Baekchun whispered coldly. But if we continue hiding behind you whenever a strong opponent emerges, we will remain behind you forever. We might be a hindrance now, but if we fight like this, we'll be able to support you properly one day. If you want to push me away, you'll have to knock me out. If I die, then I die. But I refuse to continue watching from behind. Chung Myung sighed deeply. But this guy is saying all the right things. Chung Myung knew that Baekchun's words were correct. In order to grow up, one had to experience real battles. The more dangerous the battle, the greater the potential growth. In other words, for the growth of Mount Hua, Chung Myung needed to trust the others and let them participate, even if he could solve the problem on his own. I know it in my head. But Chung Myung never had children, nor did he raise any kids. But now, he felt as though he understood a bit about a parent's heart. Even though he understood that they needed to overcome adversity and survive difficult situations, he would step up first to shield them whenever he felt there was danger. Chung Myung glanced at the kids and spoke. I won't help you, even if it looks like you're going to die. That's what I hoped for. I never even thought you'd come to help. Once in a while, you seem to overestimate your own character. Jogul Sahyung, let's have a talk after this. Huh? All of them looked at Jogul with pitiful eyes. He always seemed to say something that crossed the line when he got excited. Finally, Chung Myung clenched his sword and looked ahead. How could he explain this? It's a strange feeling. He couldn't believe it. It felt like the burden increased. But, let's go, Sahyung. Let's go, Saje. Let's show them all the power of Mount Hua. Please leave something for me to do, Chung Myung Sahyung. Chung Myung bowed his head a little. Strange. Really strange. This feeling was not reliable at all. The Mount Hua of the past no longer existed. No matter how hard he tried, he would never be able to bring that back. But Chung Myung shouted, Let's go! Break those bastards' heads! Yeah! Ah! His Sahyung shouted and charged. Marching in step with them, Chung Myung bit his lip. My Sahyung, my sect leader Sahyung, my Mount Hua is right here too. Chapter 157. Now let's go catch the Wudang bastards. Sam Salgui's eyes narrowed. How did it end up like this? This wasn't the plan. An important goal for them was to reduce the number of competitors for the tomb, and securing their stable position was even more important. As long as they didn't face sects like Wudang, they had a chance of having the upper hand. Therefore, he had to somehow find someone to fight on his side, a temporary alliance. And in fact, he effortlessly managed to get people to fight with him. It was going perfectly, at least until these idiots showed up. Ah! You bastard! Deal with them properly! I'm dealing with them more than I can. It was said by a person in a white robe who seemed gentle like a sage. But now he saw him in action. It seemed that having Baekchun as his opponent was a huge mistake on his part. And they constantly seemed to have somebody on their side cornering the giant. And there was also that temperamental young one who constantly stopped attacks directed at the disciples of Mount Hua. It was the same for the other disciples. In the meantime, he could see countless people on his side being taken down. This was why he hated going against people who acted like a proper group or sect, because they were different. And these guys' trust in each other was unlike any other sect he had ever seen. They screamed nothing but curses from their mouths, but their bodies moved to defend their companions. We cannot win. It was embarrassing for them to even admit, but the one called Chung Myung was a monster. Samsalgui himself couldn't kill Gokbu in under 50 moves, despite being on the same level as he was. This young man was doing something that even the elders of the forces of evil would have a hard time doing. A monster. That was all he could think of when he saw Chung Myung. Fight those who you can defeat, and avoid those you cannot. Having such a thought in this situation meant that he thought that Chung Myung belonged to the latter. Even if he died and came back to life a number of times, he knew that Chung Myung couldn't be defeated. Even at that moment, he could hear the screams of his allies as they fell. Once the balance was broken, it couldn't be restored, and injured people were of no help to them anyway. I have to run away. He thought that and slowly retreated. It wasn't like this was a closed place. If he wanted to retreat, all he would have to do was run to the space behind him. Had he known Mount Hua was at this level before, he would have left the others and escaped right away. Luckily, he was still in the back. Whatever I have to do, I need to run away before the others notice. Now there were 3 groups of people in the tomb. The Wudang sect, the people who pursued the Wudang sect members, and the people here. This place had them, Mount Hua and the Beggars Union, but that didn't matter. The most important thing was that he had to run from here and join the second group of people. If there wasn't much difference between the Wudang sect members and the pursuit team behind them, then maybe his presence could change the situation. So, the person hit by Chung Myung's sword fell, bleeding profusely. As if that was the signal, Samsalgui ran back with all his might. His body cut through the wind. Had he ever run this desperately in his life? He was someone who was confident in himself when it came to slaughtering people. But now, he was running away from them because it was clear that Mount Hua's disciples would come for him and defeat him if he stayed. It isn't the strong who survive, but rather, the ones who survive are the strong. Samsalgui bit his lip. He had to run now, but he would stay ahead of them in the future. Their group might have been inferior to the people left here, but the people pursuing the Wudang members had to be of a higher level than the people left here. And if he could successfully convince them, it wouldn't be difficult to kill the Mount Hua disciples who would eventually catch up to them. He promised to himself that he would repay this disgrace twofold and put force in his legs. This bastard is acting so disgustingly. He felt a tremendous shock throughout his body. He lost his balance and fell to the ground, unable to breathe. Thud, thud, thud. Since he was unable to control his speed when he fell, he hit the ground hard and then rolled. He was trembling in pain as he shook his head. When he opened his eyes, he saw the face he least wanted to see. Chung Myung. That monstrous bastard was looking right at him. Bastard! No matter how temporary this alliance was, how can you run away when the people on your side are fighting for their lives, huh? Samsalgui's eyes trembled. No, Chung Myung was clearly fighting others, so how did he catch him? He slowly turned his head to check the situation. It was unreasonable to see all the people behind him as he had already entered the hallway of the path behind. But he saw the people who were fighting Chung Myung a moment ago on the ground. That... It could only mean that Chung Myung had knocked down all of the people who were fighting him and had chased after him. It was a situation he couldn't fully comprehend, so he just stared at Chung Myung. And Chung Myung opened his mouth. Yeah! Chung Myung tilted his head to both sides. Crack, crack. The crack echoed in his ears. Loyal? You mean I have to risk my life for damn loyalty? Oh? When he said that, Chung Myung's eyes went wide. Damn it! What kind of loyalty should I have to those who I met for the first time today? That is true. Chung Myung nodded as if that made sense. He admitted that. Don't worry, I didn't catch you because of that. Then why? If I let you go like this, you will surely tell the people ahead about us, right? Chung Myung smiled brightly. It is because I'm the type of person who can see such things happening. Sam Salgui closed his eyes shut as he looked at Chung Myung, who was approaching him. Phew. Yunjong took a deep breath. He didn't realize it when he was fighting, but now that it was done, his whole body hurt. A real fight. This was completely different from sparring. The pressure of his life being at stake and the blurred judgment because of his nervousness. Jogul was sitting on the ground with his back drenched in sweat, and Yunjong put his hand on Jogul's shoulder. You did good. No, Sayoung, you suffered a lot. Jogul spoke in a tone that wasn't his. They say you have to go through real battle to know your skills. Now I realize what that means. I didn't know I was such a mess. A mess. That was a weird choice of words. No matter how much Chung Myung helped, Yunjong and Jogul handled Sun Myung together. The entire Mount Hua Sect would be in shock if they knew about that. It was because that was the fame behind the name Sun Myung. These two disciples could never compare to him. Still, the reason Jogul was saying it was simple. His eyes were comparing everyone and everything. He remembered what Chung Myung showed them, and since they hadn't met the standard that Chung Myung required from them, they couldn't be happy even after winning. It initially felt like they barely reached the level that Chung Myung was talking about, but in reality, they weren't anywhere near it. There's nothing to be disappointed about. Baekchun walked up to them. It is only natural that you cannot show your entire skills here. Everyone wants to show what they strived for, but it is impossible to actually display it in such situations. Don't be discouraged and look at your current skills. Your real skills are what you used in battle. Yes, Sasuk. I will keep that in mind. Baekchun nodded his head, and just as he was about to say more, he heard something from behind. That? You? Real skills? Don't. Baekchun began to frown. Chung Myung was walking toward them and was dragging someone by their leg. Baekchun was unable to confirm who that person was, but he was sure that he had to be someone who ran. Chung Myung dragged the man and threw him into a corner. The corner was already full of people who had been defeated by Mount Hua. No one among them was dead. Chung Myung had killed 2 of them, but the others had just lost consciousness and weren't dead. They might have been injured, but the disciples of Mount Hua didn't kill anyone. Baekchun knew it. A person's life wasn't something he wanted on his hands. The disciples of Mount Hua weren't ready to kill. And contrary to that, we are too soft. So far, this wasn't a problem for them, but in the urgent situation the coming battles would have, the hesitation in killing someone would result in them losing their lives. They had no reason to kill someone, but they had to make up their minds if they wanted to survive here. What are you thinking about? Nothing. Baekchun sighed, looking at Chung Myung. I cannot keep up with him. The image of Chung Myung slashing the neck of Dera sword without hesitation was firmly stuck in his eyes. Perhaps it wouldn't disappear for quite a while. Baekchun steeled himself and moved to help Chung Myung, but that was also to prevent him from killing more. Maybe he was a coward to others. It was true to an extent as well. But he was someone walking on the path of Tao and had to avoid unnecessary murder. No, that was what it meant to be human. Chung Myung gently turned his head and looked at where Ma Kui and the others had fallen. If Baekchun hadn't intervened, Chung Myung would have killed them all without another thought. Well, if he was Chung Myung of the past, he would have killed them all despite his intervention. A person who sought the life of another must be prepared to die, and that was the rule everyone knew. But, well, this isn't bad. You cannot overcome your past by doing the same things that you did in the past. Chung Myung didn't change. What changed was Mount Hua. If he wanted to make Mount Hua like it was in the past, then leaning on the shoulders of others wouldn't hurt too much. Are you all ready? Yes. Chung Myung smirked. Now let's go catch those Wudang bastards. The disciples of Mount Hua shuddered at those words of Chung Myung and smiled. Chapter 158. Now let's go catch those Wudang bastards. Ho Sanja wiped his face with his sleeve. Thick sweat, mixed with blood, stained the white sleeve dark red. Damn it. He began to curse unwittingly. Half-rotten bodies lay in front of him. The dead, who were prevented from even going to heaven, could finally attain peace. As a follower of the Tao, restoring peace to the wandering dead like this was the right thing to do. Yet, Ho Sanja couldn't feel any pride in the act. Their situation wasn't pleasant enough to afford him the privilege of feeling proud. The Kangxi that he had experienced were terrible monsters. They had a steel-like body that repelled the sword and poisonous blood that spewed forward after finally breaching the flesh. Perhaps, if it wasn't for the narrow space, they could have been handled more easily. But because of this location, they had to spend far more energy dealing with these threats. In addition, are you fine? Yes, Elder. Jinhyun gripped his arm and nodded. Ho Sanja lamented at the sight of the arm. Show me. I'm fine. Move that hand. Jinhyun reluctantly lowered his hand. Ho Sanja then ripped the sleeve from his arm to get a clear look. Is it corpse poison? The skin torn by the Kangxi's nail had turned purple. It showed signs of some sort of poisoning. If it was a normal poison, then Jinhyun's body would be able to heal itself naturally. But this couldn't be anything ordinary. It's a corpse poison from that terrible Kangxi. It was bound to be more severe. If this was left alone, not only would Jinhyun's arm become useless, but the poison could flow to the heart and threaten his life. Ho Sanja grabbed the arm and infused qi into it. Elder! Shh! Jinhyun tightly shut his mouth. One shouldn't speak recklessly when internal qi is being channeled from one person to another. Energy mustn't be wasted. It was unknown what lay ahead. Perhaps there were many more horrors they had yet to experience. Unless they had time to replenish any energy used, they should clearly do their best to preserve as much as possible. Nevertheless, Ho Sanja used his internal qi to heal Jinhyun's wounds. After inducing the qi for a long time, a dark venom began flowing from the affected area. As a result, his purple arm slowly regained its natural color. Good. Elder, how could you? Ho Sanja, who had guessed what Jinhyun wanted to say, firmly spoke. Although the sword tomb's treasure and pills are precious, they can't be compared to an arm from one of our disciples. Don't speak any nonsense. Ho Sanja had a determined face. And I won't be weakened with just this much. Jinhyun bit his lip. It wasn't like Jinhyun failed to understand just how exhausting it would be to treat someone else using one's own internal qi. However, there was nothing left for him to say in this situation. I understand, Elder. Ho Sanja lightly nodded with a serious gaze and looked ahead. Corpse poison. He was tired of looking at the corpses of Kangxi. The damage would have been far greater if the Wudang hadn't taken the lead and cleared the path. Of course, The people, following at their heels, wouldn't hesitate to drag them down without appreciating their efforts. Those lucky bastards. Hall Sanja bit his lip. Even though this place was a den of evil that was filled with greedy individuals, shouldn't these people at least act appropriately according to the situation? Jin-hyun must have felt the same, so he spoke quietly. Elder, I don't understand. How can they be so wicked? Don't let yourself be shaken by them. But it's a matter of course. Why do we seek the path of Tao? With an expressionless face, Hall Sanja said, the reason we pursue the path of Tao is that it doesn't exist in the world. Isn't that why we strive to attain the Tao? If ordinary people naturally lived according to the path of Tao, then sects and subsects would be meaningless. We work hard at every moment and continue to preserve precisely because it is not an easy path to follow. Jin-hyun bowed his head as if he was trying to carve these words into his memory. You're shaken because your path isn't complete yet. Settle your mind and take control of your emotions. Yes, Elder. Hall Sanja nodded his head. And that applies to me too. Although he was confident, Hall Sanja knew himself a lot more. And what about the back? They are still blocking, but it looks hard. Let them be and keep moving. Shouldn't we help them? What would change if we went to help them? Unless we can knock them all down, we shouldn't go. It would be better to get our hands on our goal without wasting any time here. Moonpyeong, who was next to him, agreed with Hall Sanja. I think the same. Even if we head in to help now, it will be just a waste of time. Yes. Hall Sanja frowned. He didn't tell the disciples, but he had another reason to hurry. That cold wave of ki. In the midst of battle, he had felt a formidable wave of ki. The person's identity that released the wave of ki was unknown, but it would be a massive variable if such a person were to join the melee behind them. Hall Sanja had no desire to wait and meet the mysterious expert. Even the leader of a sect could crumble if they clumsily leaped into an unpredictable situation. Some sacrifices are acceptable. Wasn't it obvious what would happen if the pills were handed over to those wicked people? Hall Sanja couldn't ignore the situation. It was a secondary concern that Wudang would grow stronger. The primary issue was keeping it out of the hands of others. Hall Sanja's face was resolute. He truly believed that the end of this dreadful tomb was nearby. Gangxi wasn't something that could easily be bought or created. It was hard to imagine that there could be something more frightening than that ahead of them. Hurry! Yes! It was then. Sayong! Sayong! We can't handle it any longer! A loud voice came from behind. Damn it! Hall Sanja was cursing out now. Give up on blocking. Join us. Follow me. Yes! Before even listening to the answer, Hall Sanja ran ahead. Since Hallgong was there, he would be able to manage the disciples' well-being and follow shortly after. So Hall Sanja should run ahead and get his hands on the treasure. Jin-hyun and the Mu disciples followed him from behind. A dark cavern passed by in an instant. As they traveled through the somber cave, even the mighty Hall Sanja felt a foreboding feeling as if they were delving into the abyss. What the hell was that man thinking while making all of this? Yaksun was known as a virtuous healer. The number of sick people he had healed was innumerable, and the number of soldiers saved because of his pills were equally enormous. So Yaksun's reputation resounded at the time, and even after 200 years, people still praised him. But his tomb was full of malice. Considering Yaksun's legacy, Hall Sanja began to question if this was truly his sword tomb. I need to see it. All these questions would be answered when they reached the end of the tomb. Sayong, men are chasing from behind. Since the cave didn't have anything in it, the pursuit seemed to arrive rather fast. Ignore them. Speed up. But I said ignore it. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not losing our men here. Yes. Sanja's mind was already full of complex ideation. Had his thoughts been calm, he may have come to a different judgment. However, it wasn't an easy task to lead the disciples through constant battles and maneuver through this pitch-black cave. All of these compounding circumstances were gnawing away at Sanja's heart. If we wander around any longer than this, my heart will fail. We need to move out right away. Stop! The Wudang rats are curling their tails. Do you think you're going to be able to get out alive with us here? Chase! Chase! Don't give up on catching them! The enemy's yells could be heard ringing through the cave. Sanja bit his lip tightly. Sayong, there! Yes, he could see it. At the end of the cave, they had finally spotted a bright light. A bright light that was different from the light they had seen in the cave so far. Sanja exclaimed and shouted, Disciples, be strong! The end is almost here! Yes! The hands clenching swords tightened. Regardless of how difficult it had been to get here, it no longer mattered. If only they could get their hands on the method to manufacture that pill. We can hand the weapons over to them. He only wanted knowledge related only to pills. The weapons didn't matter to him. They could be given away. Trying to keep the weapons for themselves would only create problems for the sect outside. Shortly after, they reached the end of the cave. A dazzling light blinded them, and their vision flashed white as they slowly became accustomed to the change. Sanja was in awe at what he saw. This step. A huge cliff appeared in front of them. The brightest light was pouring in from the top. Holes. It didn't seem to be natural light. There was no way to know what the light was, but it came flooding in from the gaps in the ceiling high above them. Perhaps there was another passage besides the one they had entered. What about the pill? If this was the end, then the pill. There! Sanja's eyes didn't miss the bulging space in the middle of the cliff. There! If this was the end of the sword tomb, the exit must be where that light was coming from. And if someone had left something in this place, it would be in the middle of that cliff. Go up! Climb that cliff! It's too steep! The sheer cliff nearly formed a perfect right angle. It didn't seem to allow humans to climb it. It wasn't some mound they could just jump over. Up! Climb up right now! Yes! At Sanja's words, the Wudang disciples began to cling to the cliff. Without delay, they started to climb. Soon after, those pursuing them exited the cave and poured into the new area. What? Hey! Those Wudang bastards are climbing the cliff! Follow me! Don't let them get those weapons! Everyone was eager to climb that cliff as their eyes burned a piercing red. It seemed that a view from hell was about to unfold again. At that moment, a formidable wave of ki began to emanate from the cave they passed through. Through the dark cave, a group was approaching at tremendous speed. Chapter 159. Now let's go catch the Wudang bastards. You didn't even run that far to be gasping so much. This is why I said you people should train more on a regular basis. You aren't even human. That bastard has no conscience. Asshole. Who doesn't even let their sayongs have some rest? I really want to hit him. The disciples of Mount Hua were running at their best speed, and Chung Myung, instead of being ahead, was behind them with his sword drawn. Looking at his greedy eyes and his sword stained with blood, the group couldn't help but run fast. Even if their legs fell off, they had to run away from him. This bastard is scarier than those bats. I'd rather be happy if the Wudang Sect bastards were here. Even Jogul, who had the most strength among the people, began to have a hard time. Ugh! He couldn't say anything apart from that. He was trying his best to run, but his saje was saying they were weak. Where did the common sense that people kept talking about go? It hurts! Bastard! That hurts! Run! Run! Chung Myung kept poking Jogul in the ass with his sword. The bastards there are probably trying to take away my things. Do you all have a death wish or something? Even the sun doesn't shine here. Don't keep hitting that, you sword-wielding brat. Unfortunately, they were all underground, so there was no light in here. And even sadder than that was the fact that there was Chung Myung behind them, and Jogul was moving back and forth, enduring the constant stabs to his behind. I might die at this rate. With that thought of dying, scream more and run faster. Chung Myung's eyes were shining. He had every reason to urge them. Those bastards aren't moving anymore. Which meant that the end was near. And that meant that there had to be the pill there. He went through all sorts of things to come here, so he didn't want to see someone else to just take the thing and leave. How dare the Wudang bastards touch my stuff? They aren't even yours to begin with. Not even a scammer will live like this. But what could they do? This guy is the disciple of Mount Hua and the cute saje for the Sasuks and elders. And they weren't the only ones suffering because of Chung Myung. Mount Hua's divine dragon! A desperate voice came from behind. Yeah, you bastard! Let's go together! You were with us till now, so why are you running ahead now? What, Mr. Beggar? Chung Myung snorted. Run! Run faster! We can't, you bastard! We're beggars! We beggars can't! Seriously, you guys do act like beggars. Hong Dae-kwang's eyes filled with tears at the words of Chung Myung. After this task is done, I won't ever lose to Mount Hua, you damn bastard. But unfortunately, it wasn't over yet. Beggars, run! After them! Branch leader, you should move first. We cannot. How dare you ask me to go first? Run faster! Not. Branch leader, please, I'd rather die. God damn it, how can you act like an old person? Those people are the same age as you, and they are running like that. Just shut up and run. This is a matter of pride for the Beggars Union. Begging should be the only thing we are good at. Yeah! Hong Dae-kwang bit his teeth and kicked the beggar who was in front of him. Why are you hitting me? The beggar who was kicked turned back and asked in rage. This doesn't seem right. Why am I not able to be like Chung Myung? Realizing that bullying people wasn't an easy thing to do, Hong Dae-kwang pushed the beggar ahead. Yeah, Mount Hua's divine dragon! Wait! Ignoring Hong Dae-kwang's screams, Chung Myung just didn't care and kept running. If he missed this pill, he was going to beat the shit out of the beggars. It was obvious that if he lost the pills, then he wouldn't be able to relieve his anger even after hitting the beggars for 3 or 4 days. The exit! Light! Ah! Shouts of joy erupted from the mouth of Mount Hua's disciples. Of course, it wasn't the joy of finding what they were aiming for, but because they would finally be able to get away from this damn torture. Light! Jogul, who took the lead, was panting heavily as he looked at the exit, and then he looked ahead and became shocked. What is this? He saw a huge cliff to the top and people climbing it. The moment they saw that Jogul's eyes trembled, Baekchun and Yoonjung, who were next to him, had similar reactions. What am I seeing? It looks like a cliff, right? A strange light shone in the eyes of Mount Hua's disciples who were looking at the cliff. It wasn't because they saw the Wudang disciples who were halfway up the cliff. That is a cliff! A cliff! What? Cliff? Chung Myung, who came from behind, looked at the cliff. Up there! His fingers pointed to the protruding part in the middle of the cliff. It looked like it was far, but it must have been a space where around 100 people could climb simultaneously. You mean for us to go up there? 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 Jogul, who was staring blankly at the cliff, tilted his head and said, "What?" His lips were slowly curving upwards. "What? Why is it so bland in the end?" To climb a cliff? To see this in the last minute? Maybe this wasn't in vain. Moisture filled the eyes of Yunjung. They were tears. A cliff? A cliff here? This has to be a joke. There was no one who could climb a cliff like the second and third class disciples of Mount Hua. Thanks to the training of the beast, they would climb the cliffs of Mount Hua 5 times or more in a single day. At this point, they were so familiar with climbing cliffs that they would sometimes doze off when walking up the cliff and even climb the cliff after eating. Every time they had gone through the training, they had sworn at Chung Myung, but for the training, which seemed like the most useless one, for that to shine in this place. Of course, everyone was shaking. "Let's go!" Yaksu must have never come to Mount Hua. This level is too easy for us. The disciples of Mount Hua ran as hard as they could without even waiting for Chung Myung's words and went for the cliff. Those who hadn't yet dared to climb the cliff quickly turned their gazes to the disciples of Mount Hua who appeared out of nowhere. And, What? How? So fast? As if crawling on the floor, they were scaling up the cliff. No, everyone gasped as they saw the disciples of Mount Hua climbing the cliff faster than them. No, are they spiders or what? To climb a cliff like that? They were surprised at the speed at which the climbing happened. It was just a matter of strength and familiarity, but the onlookers knew nothing about that. In their view, the disciples of Mount Hua, who were climbing the cliff much faster than them, looked outrageous. And what was even surprising was that it wasn't just one person with such speed, but rather all 5 of them. Even though they knew they didn't have time to feel the shock, they couldn't take their eyes off them. Stop! It was only then that the people came to their senses and glared at the disciples of Mount Hua. "Throw something at them! Put a sword through their backs!" Those who didn't have the ability to climb the cliff couldn't give up, so they began to throw their weapons at the disciples who were climbing up. And of course, the disciples of Mount Hua didn't stop. Puck! Jogul's eyes bulged out when he saw the sword narrowly pass by his cheek. No! Humans are seriously the most horrible ones. Did they mean that other people shouldn't climb the cliff because they themselves couldn't? Still, throwing a sword was too much. "Don't worry and keep going up." "They keep throwing swords and knives." "I'll stop it. Just go." "How can you stop all of them?" It was then. "Ya, you bastards! Don't you dare touch Mount Hua!" Hong Daeguang, who arrived late, quickly grasped the situation and smashed the attacks to the ground. "Damn all these bastards! Mount Hua's divine dragon! Don't worry and go up!" Chung Myung clicked his tongue. Pretending to act like you're doing something great. Anyway, at least do it right this time. The fact there was no obstruction increased their speed even more. Jogul hurriedly moved his body. Compared to the other things we had to face, this is like a breeze. They weren't just empty words. The disciples of Mount Hua had already caught up to the ones who were climbing the cliff first, and they had begun to surpass them. In the middle, the weapons that flew from below were all being bounced off by Chung Myung's sword. Each time he blocked one, he would yell, "Pill! Internal key! My pill!" My appetite is falling. Let's just go up quickly. I don't know what that crazy brat would do if someone else puts their hands on the pill. Trembling in fear, the disciples of Mount Hua diligently moved up faster. "Elder! Over there!" Ho Sanja opened his eyes wide. A group of warriors were chasing behind them with a formidable force. Their speed in climbing the cliff resembled the swiftness of a group of monkeys. No, not even monkeys could climb this well, so these people should be considered as something more. Mount Hua is the disciples of Mount Hua, elder. Heo Sanja grunted at the words of Jin Hyun. It's them. The people who made the current situation for them were here. Considering that fact, he couldn't help but be enraged. But what he had to worry about more wasn't his anger at Mount Hua, but the speed at which they were climbing. How did this happen? No matter how strong they were, there should be a clear limit to their strength, considering the age gap. Then what about their climbing? Just how were they climbing this fast? It was something that he couldn't understand. Whatever the reason for it was actually happening right in front of his eyes. Hogong. Yes, Sayong. Take the children up. I will head there first. Yes. Heo Sanja smashed his hand into the cliff and used that to climb up. Boom. His body began to soar up as he felt ki under his feet. That! Someone screamed from below. When the body of a Wudang disciple reached the peak of their learning, they were known to be able to lift more than a dozen people into the air. Of course, climbing such a high cliff at once was unreasonable, but if he did this from the middle of the cliff, then Heo Sanja could reach the top of the cliff before others did. I'm gonna go ahead first. Chung Myung, what are you doing, brat? Even if it means death, I will eat it. Chung Myung's eyes were covered in greed, and the disciples of Mount Hua who saw that went silent. Chung Myung took off his footwear and began to run up the cliff. Shit! He's running? Chung Myung's feet touched the flat ground, and at the same time, his body bounced up at a terrifying speed. Ah! Although the start was late, the speed at which Chung Myung ran up the cliff was faster than how Heo Sanja climbed the cliff. That young one! Just who is that young one? Who? You are the young one. Do you know how old I am? Ugh, I feel so frustrated. You won't believe it even if I tell you. Being young must be fun. The two people were climbing the cliff at an insane speed, as if they were competing with each other. Chung Myung had used the recoil from the landing to keep moving up, and Heo Sanja was shooting into the air and flying upwards as he used the rocks on the cliff's edges as a foothold. Ha! Ha! Heo Sanja and Chung Myung rose up at the same time from the edge of the cliff and reached the gap they were aiming for simultaneously. Chapter 160. Now let's go catch those Wudang bastards. Tak, tak. The two people came face to face with each other as soon as they finished climbing to the end of the cliff. Soon, Chung Myung's eyes widened. There! He saw a place where swords were inserted. There were some spears and axes too, but it was mostly swords. It probably meant that. This is the sword tomb. It was the moment when all the doubts which had built up in his mind and the thoughts that made him anxious were dispelled. Then that. Chung Myung quickly looked closer. It has to be. It's not just those things. He had no interest in these treasures. He simply didn't care. There was only one thing he wanted. Right. There was a big rock in the middle of the swords which were deeply pierced into the ground. On that rock, there was a small wooden box. There was no need to put a wooden box in between the inserted swords unless it held something, right? The soul vitality pill. It was unknown if the box really contained it or if it was some normal pill. Yet, he still wanted what was in the box. The moment Chung Myung was about to move, he heard a heavy voice. Are you Mount Hua's divine dragon? Chung Myung slightly tilted his head. He moved his gaze from the wooden box and looked at Heo Sanja, who was glaring at him with a sword drawn. Oh? Killing intent. Chung Myung shook his head and said, And what if I am? You two have come all the way here. Why did you create such a situation? I have no idea what you're talking about. Heo Sanja's face contorted. If only Chung Myung hadn't robbed Mujin and given the map to everyone in Nanyang, such a situation wouldn't have happened, and they wouldn't have suffered so much. In such a scenario, Mount Hua would have never even had a chance. But he did everything he shouldn't, and such a situation happened. Should he be called smart or wicked? I acknowledge your abilities, but that is all. Go back quietly. I don't have patience anymore. You are but just a third-class disciple. If you try to fight against me, you will be beheaded. I'm so scared. Chung Myung trembled sarcastically. But don't you find it strange saying such things? A smile formed on Chung Myung's lips. You're already giving out this killing intent, right? Weren't you going to jump on me right away? Or were you trying to play at something else? Heo Sanja didn't answer. Maybe it was because he knew that Chung Myung's words weren't entirely wrong. Am I really considering that young one as a threat? In terms of strength and power, he was no threat. No matter how smart a child was, compared to the descendants of the Juga family or those professionally trained in warfare, this child would be nothing. But seeing Chung Myung up close, he changed his mind. Let's admit it, this guy is dangerous. The Jin disciples and the other Wudang disciples wouldn't fall behind too much, but they would have a tough time with this one. And their basics and teachings were different as well. If this boy was allowed to grow like this, Mount Hua may one day eat up Wudang whole. At that moment, Heo Sanja felt the same emotions that the elder of the Jongnam sect felt in the past. No, this time, the emotions Heo Sanja felt were more intense, and it was giving out a much bigger premonition of crisis than what Sama Seung felt at that time. Walk away, Heo Sanja said sternly. You said it. I am not following the path of Tao right now. You have shaken me out of it. You troubled me enough that I decided to put that aside because of all the stress which has built up inside me. Oh? Chung Myung kept looking at him. What if the positions were changed? Well, I would rather not have the positions changed since there is no one stronger than me. The best option was indeed to kill Chung Myung, since in the midst of everything that was happening here, no one could be held responsible if anyone died. Maybe if things went south in front of people, they would be criticized. But here, with no one around, no one was scared. But Heo Sanja kept telling Chung Myung to back away. Even if Chung Myung might turn into a threat to Wudang in the future, he wasn't going to kill a young disciple here. Is it because Wudang is Wudang? Coming all the way here, he would have seen a lot of things he couldn't see outside, but he was still sticking to his sect's principles. The old elder was proudly showing the reason why the name of Wudang was held sacred in the world. 1. I am not going to back down. Chung Myung took a step ahead, and then a storm-like momentum erupted from the body of Heo Sanja. Refusing my offer. Please. Your body looks like you're itching for a fight. Enough talking, and let's just start the fight. You. Heo Sanja clenched his teeth. When had he ever heard a young man say such things to him? I gave him enough chances. He should feel at ease. He tried to suppress his desire to behead the man and tried to let him go, but the child, he showed no signs of understanding it. Tuh! Heo Sanja rushed in as if no more words were needed. Chung Myung also rushed at him. Two people at the same time flew over the densely pierced weapons. Chak! As if a blue line of silk was created in the air, a very clear sword key was directed at Chung Myung. It was similar to Mujin's, but also different at the same time. And Chung Myung knew that he couldn't fight the same way he had until now. The opponent was an elder of the Wudang sect. His current opponent was probably the strongest person Chung Myung had faced since his reincarnation. Chung Myung clenched the hand which held his sword, and as he rushed ahead, he kicked the handle of the swords that had been stabbed into the ground. Tsk! And Heo Sanja's sword key passed right by him and cut through the hem of his clothes and almost touched his chest. He's no joke. This sword key was something that he could have deflected with just his hand in the past, but for his current self, it was threatening enough to claim his life. If it had hit properly, I would have gone down. Since the Wudang sect people were known to use a softer style, all things that actually hit the opponent's body were known to be strong. But now, Just because a person makes porridge by gently beating it, could it be considered soft? That wasn't true. Whatever their method of using the sword was, the sword that was currently aiming at him didn't have the intent to subdue him. Rather, it wanted to kill him. If not, would the person whose sect has so much history do such a thing? Let's do it! A fire blazed in Chung Myung's eyes. Chak chak! Sword ki as thin as silk began to come at him one after another without interruption and flew towards Chung Myung. Hut! With a brief exclamation, Chung Myung held onto the handle of his sword a bit behind him and then dashed ahead by kicking the sword ki. What? Heo Sanja was startled when he saw it. He kicked the sword ki? It wasn't about hitting it and moving, but constantly running ahead by jumping onto it. It wasn't like there was a wooden plank for him to do that in the air. So what was that? Amazing execution. It was to a point where he wouldn't even dream of trying something like that with his own limbs. That meant one thing. He didn't know if the depth of his comprehension and the operation of his ki was different, but Mount Hua's divine dragon was undoubtedly superior to Heo Sanja. He didn't know how that was possible, but he couldn't deny it after seeing it with his eyes. As Heo Sanja was unable to get over the shock of the sight he had just witnessed, Chung Myung approached him. You! Heo Sanja moved ahead and rushed forward. He slammed his sword into Chung Myung, who was rushing towards him. Kwang! There was a bursting sound. The swords that were embedded in the floor trembled. Kuh! Chung Myung coughed a little blood. He had definitely blocked and even defended himself from Heo Sanja's attack. Nevertheless, the sword of Heo Sanja shook his insides. That bastard! He was so good. The sword of Wudang was amazing. It was a sword that subdued its opponents with softness. However, as soon as Heo Sanja understood how Chung Myung operated, he immediately abandoned his own technique and adapted. He thought that no matter how creepy Chung Myung was when it came to adjusting, Heo Sanja had the experience to counter it. And his thoughts were right. It was unreasonable for anyone to counter an elder who had suffered and trained for decades. And this man, this elder, seemed like someone who learned from countless life or death experiences. Heo Sanja's eyes fluttered as he looked at the sword. You stopped it. A third-class disciple. It wasn't a first-class disciple or second-class, but a third-class disciple who had just turned 20. And that too, the sword ki from an elder of the Wudang sect. I guess you didn't beat Mujin with luck. Just how were you able to block it? Well, we aren't close enough to have those conversations, you know? If that was the case, then we should just let our swords talk. He had no conscience. Seriously. Heo Sanja spoke then. Listen. Chung Myung, who was about to mumble something, went silent. This is a taboo in the Taoist sect, but if you are willing, I want to take you in as a disciple of Wudang, regardless of the cost. And if you wish, I can make you a second-class disciple. Huh? If you have this much talent, then relearning martial arts wouldn't be a problem. And in Wudang, you would have a better time learning things and get more experiences as well. So, Chung Myung smiled. No, maybe it might sound a bit enticing to others since the Wudang sect was asking him to abandon Mount Hua and come to him whatever the cost. They even said they would raise his disciple rank as well. But this was Chung Myung. No, old man, you have to be out of your mind. You are doing business with other sect's disciples. Then, Heo Sanja bit his lip and said, I will accept you as my disciple. Then you can become the first-class disciple of Wudang. Enough. Chung Myung responded with a smirk. Nevertheless, Heo Sanja didn't give up. It is commendable that you have such deep affection to the sect you belong to. But if you are a warrior, you need to seize opportunities. And Wudang is better than Mount Hua. Enough! Why? Why do you not understand what is beneficial to you? Seriously, you're so tenacious. Wudang can give you more than Mount Hua. You don't seem to understand. Chung Myung smiled. I have no intention of being a disciple of someone who is weaker than me. What? And Chung Myung deflected the sword that came at him with a little force. And then he moved back and forth and jumped off the cliff. With his powerful feet, he soared high once again, and then he kicked the ground at once, making all the swords on the cliff fly high and move them towards Hosanja. What about Udang? Chung Myung raised his ki as much as he could. He kicked the swords again. We'll make Mount Hua! The weapons all went towards Hosanja like arrows. The best in the world! In this life, he would make it happen for sure.